I was a normal, regular person who had a lot of dreams. When I did have the stroke, I didn't even know what a stroke was.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 80 of the Strokecast. And also, welcome to Authors in August. This month, I am featuring interviews with authors who have either survived a stroke or who work with stroke survivors. Some of the books are about stroke and some are not. But, I'm just a huge fan of books. My entire apartment is just lined with bookcases, and now I've got books overflowing into other shelves. A few years ago, I never expected I would have to have a section of my personal library dedicated to stroke and neurology books, but, here we are. I can spend hours in a bookstore, whether that's going to be Elliott Bay Books here in Seattle, Powell's City of Books down in Portland, or really just wherever books are. And of course, the irony of that now is that it is so much more difficult to read a book. Hemiparesis makes it very difficult. Paper books are not really optimized for one-handed use. You usually have to hold a book with one hand and turn the page with another. So reading them now, it presents its own set of challenges. But regardless, I still love celebrating books and just the feel of them and being surrounded by them. Previous guests like Drs. Brown and Lorig, Ted Baxter, Pete Smith, and Christine Lee have, of course, also written books. You can find all of those episodes, and you'll be able to find all of the new episodes by authors over at strokecast.com/authors, so be sure to check that out. Most of the time when stroke survivors think about death, I know this is super cheery, it's about thinking about how we avoided it. I sometimes talk about how at one point my own blood tried to kill me and it failed. But today's guest, it means something else. You see, death and specifically homicide actually fueled his career as a writer before he had his stroke. For this week's episode, I sat down with Paul at the Third Place Books food court. This is a fantastic community space up in Lake Forest Park, Washington, just north of Seattle. It's a huge space, and it's right next to a huge independent bookstore and a fantastic bakery and a great little stand that sells fantastic taro boba tea. And it's just a really neat facility that the community has access to, and it turns out it's a really nice place to go ahead and record a podcast episode. So if you're in Seattle and doing the tour of bookstores, be sure to head on up to Lake Forest Park and check out Third Place Books. I met Paul Sanders through the Seattle Young Adult Stroke Survivors Group. A week after he finished his most recent book, Paul suffered a severe stroke while under anesthesia for a different surgical procedure. The hospital he was at blamed the medication he was on for his odd feelings and sent him home. It wasn't until a wellness check several days later by the police that he ended up actually getting some stroke care. Paul's books tell true stories of some of the deadliest murders in recent years. Now, the combination of aphasia, apraxia of speech, and short-term memory loss means that Paul has put his career on hold until he is once again able to write books. So now, let's meet Paul Sanders. So Paul, thanks for being on the show this week.
I am honored.
Awesome. It's one of those great perks of being a part of the support group is that I get to talk to so many interesting people who've done, some amazing things after their strokes and with their lives before stroke as well. What was your life like leading up to your stroke and sort of that month ahead?
I was a writer I was writing books. I'd been writing books like this, true crime, for about 5 years. I had a regular job, so I go to work, I would drive, I drop people's food, made good money. I was a normal, regular person who had a lot of dreams. When I did have the stroke, I didn't even know what a stroke was.
That happens to a lot of us. When it happens, we're just like, wait, what is going on here? So what happened that day?
I went to work on my a medical, call it a sorry to say the word, starts with a S.
A surgical procedure?
Yes. It's something that I planned on. I knew I was going to work on something. I went to, let's call it a hospital, but where I went to work on the problem. I got there at about 6 in the morning, and I was asleep for 8 hours. When I woke up, I was different. And I was trying to tell people that something's wrong with my head. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know exactly what it was. The people who worked on me said, no, it's because of the pills and these that say word.
More of the surgery.
Yes. That don't worry, it was the pills. So you're going to be a little crazy for a little bit. That's not the words exactly. And so I went home. I was going to be off of work for about a week. Halfway through that week, my friend came over to check on me. And I was trying to tell him, I have something wrong with me and I can't figure out what's wrong with me. And he did the same thing that they did. He said, it's the pills. Right. You're doing too many pills. Huh. That's why you're not the same.
Right.
In my heart, I knew something was wrong and I knew it wasn't the pills. So I stopped doing the pills that day. All of them. It took 2 days later that I called a friend of mine. His name is Ken, and he's in Cali. And he talks to me and he says, Paul, how come your words are all messed up? Have you been drinking? And I said, Ken, I haven't drink anything in 9 years. And that's when I'm talking to him and he said, I'm going to call you back. The next day, apparently, the police came over, but I wasn't home. The day after that, the police came over. They knock on the door, I open, and they said, we're looking for Paul. And I said, well, that's me. Why are you looking for me? It's all the police are there. Like, I didn't do anything.
My life's interesting, but not that interesting.
Yes. And the policeman, who's very nice, said, we're going to ask you 3 questions, okay? And at the end of those questions, if you can answer those, then we'll leave. Are you good with that? And I said yes. So they said the first question, they said, who is the president? So excuse me if I say I couldn't say his name. I really couldn't. Even though I wanted to say, I couldn't say it. All I could say was, the guy that works there, that guy. I'm like, and they said, good job on the answering, but that's not the words we were looking for.
Sure.
He said, okay, what's the next question? And I said, okay, I'm ready. He says, where are you living? And I said, well, you're at my home. This is where I live. And they said, where do you live? I couldn't answer that question. And he said, you know what? You did good, but we have one more question. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, what day is it? And I did not have an answer. And that's when he looked at me and he said, we think it's important for you to go to the hospital.
Wow. You know, I think what's really interesting there is one of those challenges with dealing with anybody who's got a brain injury.
Yes.
Is you're asking the person to give you data when they're incapable of processing that. The folks at the hospital, you know, we're telling you it's just the medication, and you couldn't provide more detail to them because your language and your words were getting all messed up.
Yes.
And then as a very, you know, since you've done, you know, you're a very sharp guy, so when the police start asking you those questions, you're just automatically kicking into adaptive strategies
Yes.
to answer the question in a way that doesn't really answer what they're asking.
Correct. And I didn't know why. I didn't understand what a stroke was. Of course, when I went back to the hospital, then we understand it's a stroke. I learned what aphasia is, apraxia is. I never heard of these things before. Mm-hmm. I went from a normal person to I have this new thing. And I will tell you, when I was at the hospital now for a week, and I was scared.
Sure.
Scared because I didn't know what's going to happen. What is wrong with me? Do I have cancer? I don't understand what happened. Did I do something? Could I have done something better? And of course, the doctors who really worked on me, I'm really happy for them in helping me. But inside, what goes on in your head, it's scary. It is really scary because and when the doctor said after 2 days, 2 doctors come in, they sit me down and they said, look, you had a massive stroke. You have aphasia, you have apraxia, and you have short-term memory. I've never heard of these things. Mm-hmm. And one thing that I've learned from a lot of people who've gone through being a stroke is I think the doctors want to tell you they don't want to give really good news, as in you're going to get better.
Right.
Many of the doctors said you will never write again, and maybe you will never talk again. And that was scary.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really frustrating when I hear of medical teams saying that to survivors. And yeah, I kind of get it. Part of it is the doctors are afraid of false hope and getting sued.
Yes.
Part of it is that doctor that you see in the hospital is never going to see you again after you leave. So they never see anybody recover.
Correct.
But once somebody believes they're not going to get better, then they're not going to get better. And you can't just tell them there's no hope.
Well, what's interesting, Bill, is the week before I had the stroke, I finished my last book a week before. And I remember I was at the hospital, and even though the doctors are talking to me and they're putting things in your blood and you go through the MRI and all things I've never seen before. Mm-hmm. And in the back of my head was, okay, I'm at the hospital, but I just wrote a book. I have to get work on that. So please, can we finish this so I can go home and work on my book?
Exactly. It's like, I don't have time for this stroke.
Yes.
I'll give you a day, but then I got stuff
I got
to do.
some things going on. Yes, this is, where did this come from? I can't do this right now. So, but I'm very positive. And the reason I am here with you is because I'm still positive. And if I wasn't like that, I've known you now for more than a year. And I think from my heart, the reason I'm here is because it was a really bad accident, but because I am positive, no matter what, I am back here now, and I'm honored of that.
Yeah, it's amazing how this stuff brings folks together in different ways. Did they figure out what caused your stroke?
They're still working on it.
Gotcha.
The thing I've learned about stroke is many of us will actually never know exactly what happened.
Right.
One minute you're regular, the next day you've had this stroke, and doctors have told me we're still looking, but we haven't found what exactly happened.
Well, 20% of strokes have no known cause. And that's why, I think it's so important where even if, for folks out there who have no risk factors, they're unlikely to have a stroke, you still have to be able to, recognize the signs that many folks do experience, the be fast symptoms of a stroke, so that if you do see that, you can get treatment as quickly as possible. Now, it sounds like you, unfortunately, weren't showing well, aside from the speech.
I was asleep when this happened. So I went to sleep, and when I woke up 8 hours later, in between, somewhere I had the stroke.
Right.
So it's not regular where people go through a stroke, and you can say, oh, on the right side, you're not talking right, you can't, everything. But I was asleep.
Exactly. It becomes also different. So, I mean, it seems like you have made, from the doctors being in the position of, look, dude, you're never going to write again, you're not going to speak again. You're here, you're talking very clearly. What deficits are you living with today?
Oh, there's so many things. Yes, I lost my job. I lost my license to drive. I gave my truck back to the bank. I now take buses everywhere. I've never been on a bus before. And after having the stroke, to learn how to drive or be in the back of a bus, all of this is a new thing for me. All of it. What else did I learn? I learned how to get lost. And if you're not thinking, all of a sudden you realize, I'm lost. What do you do? And the other thing I learned how to use my pen and my notepad. So I learned how to, if I couldn't talk to people and say, where am I going? Where can you help me? Well, you can't, especially with a new stroke, you still have to learn how to talk again. So I learned how to use my notepad. So I would write a word and say, where is this? Can you help me? Those are one of the things. No, right now, I cannot write books now. And I'm proud that I did write my books. There's 5 of them. 4 of them are true crime. And I'm so glad that before the stroke that I wrote my first book. So that after the stroke, I can look back and say, I'm so glad I did that. I believe, Bill, that I will write books again. But I know it may take a while. So, the other thing, you've talked about the deficits, okay? I also look at something else. And one thing for me that I've learned from this experience is don't look back. it doesn't do anything except make you angry and frustrated. Instead, I look forward, be positive. The more negative you have, the worse your life is going to get. And so I'm positive. So I would rather find a way to be humorous about it. And it's a big thing that it happens with a stroke. But you've got to some way find a way in your heart to find a way to be happy. Right. And that's a hard thing to find. You learn that the little steps that you do, I've learned really fast that those aren't big steps. They're little tiny ones, and at the end of the day, you have to slap yourself and say, I did something. Even though it's a little, I got, you know what I mean, better.
Those little steps add up. You put enough of them together, and you've covered quite a distance.
Yes.
I mean, you've talked about writing books before your stroke, and well, first of all, I think that's an important lesson right there now. Like you say, right now, at the moment, you couldn't write a book. In the future, sure. But if you're listening and you think you have a book in you or you have a book you want to write, go out and write it now, because you don't know when you might not be able to in the future. But had you always wanted to be an author?
I was always a reader. My favorite author was Stephen King. And the first time I read his book was 75. And I read Carrie, and after that I read The Shining, and then I read The Stand. And because of those books, the books that he wrote and how it made me feel inside, and I was kind of a teenager.
You were a teenager?
Yes. But I remember how it felt. How he wrote fiction, but it felt like non-fiction. And ever since that I was a boy, I always knew I was going to figure out how to write books one day.
What I think is really interesting, too, is that the path of your career as a writer, like say you got into Stephen King, who's writing horror, who's writing about the darkness in the universe that can come out, and from a nonfiction perspective. But when you started writing books, King was writing from fiction. When you started writing nonfiction, you were also writing about the horror of the universe in true crime.
Well, there's two parts to that. Okay, and I'll tell you very easy is in the 80s and the 90s, I was a fiction writer. So I had written 5 books. My 5th book in 97, it went to auction in New York City. 10 of the biggest publishers had my agent put that book to be auctioned, and there came a day when all of them said at the same time, we like the books, really kind of a good book, but we're not going to do it. Bill, I quit writing after that.
Wow.
And that was 17 years ago. I quit because I thought writing I spent all this work at it, and then all of a sudden, instead of getting a yes, I got a no. After that, I put away the books, and I said, you know what? It's time to grow up, and you have to get a job. And I became a restaurant manager, a top guy for some of the big places around the country. I did that for 17 years.
Wow.
One day I came home. I was living in Arizona. And I was coming home, and I opened the mail, and there's a jury summons. I looked at it. I looked at the time. I'd been down to be a jury son before. But usually you're there for one day. You waste the whole day, and they say, see you later. We'll see you in 2 years. Well, what I did not know, that first day, the first hour I was there, I was actually called. I went into the court, and there were hundreds of other jurors are there. And the judge says, okay, you are all a potential juror. So, here's what I'm going to tell you. This woman named Marissa Duvall, we suspect, he had different words,
Sure.
that we're here because her husband was killed with a hammer 5 times. Your job as the jury is to decide if she lives or die that. Those, it sounds like little small words. Let me tell you, when you have to decide after 6 months, and at the end you have to decide if she lives or dies, it's something you will never, ever, ever forget. The last day of court, we had made our decisions. And there's a moment when the judge and the lawyers come back to the room and they say, you've decided everything now. This is part of history, but do you have any questions for us? And of course, when you're part of a jury, it's not about the things they told you, it is the things they didn't tell you. So you, as jurors, get to ask questions, the questions that you can never talk about it. And at the very end, we had talked for 3 hours. At the end, I put up my hand and I said, Judge, it was honored to be a juror. I said, do you have any problem if I write a book about my experience? And he smiled and he said, that's a great idea coming from a juror. And he looked at the other lawyers and he said, counselors, do you have any problems if Paul writes a book about that? And both of them, I think they were surprised. I know the jurors were surprised. And they said, yes, we're good with that. And Bill, is different between saying I'm going to write a book or getting permission to write a book. Another is to actually do it.
Right.
And that how it became the first book called Ironically. That the name of the book is Brain Damage, A Juror's Tale. And that began my new path.
From there, you continued to write books in this genre then.
Yes.
As well.
Yes. I went on to the second book. It's called Why Not Kill Her? Of course, it's about a trial, but it's about a girl named Jodi Arias. And she had an ex-boyfriend. His name was Travis Alexander. They were split for a year. But her, Arias, she followed him. She was a stalker.
The stalker.
Yes. And at the end, she killed him. She took a knife cut him, then cut his back 29 times, then cut his throat, and then shot him in the head. And I really learned how to write after that, because now it was again the death penalty, but I saw different things. And it's the longest trial I've ever done, in a way. Mm-hmm. But I learned from that. And so that book is out. I just finished a filming on a piece of that book, Why Not Kill Her? I just came back from New York City, and I am honored to have done that. The producer had asked, how do you know Travis Alexander? And it all comes back from the trial. But at the end of that book, I also lost my job, my regular job. And I was living in Arizona. And I realized I didn't have any money to pay rent. So I called the guy who owned the place and I said, I'm out of money. I just want to let you know I might be moving. Can you give me a little time to figure out what I'm going to do? And he said, stay there for a month. At the end of that month, if you have to move, then go. If you have enough money to stay there, then you can stay there. Thank God.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Well, I put it out on Facebook that I said, it looks like I have to move, but I don't have to live in Arizona. And one of my old friends who used to be my boss, he wrote me from Seattle. And he said, why don't you come up here? I have a house and I even have a job for you. And that's how I moved to Seattle. There was a trial up here. I talked to him. I said, I kind of will write another book. And I went to that trial, and that was 4 months. And then that book is called Banquet of Consequences. It's about 6 people who were killed by a family
member?
Yes, where she and her boyfriend killed 6 people in one day. And it is now part of history in Washington. It is the most expensive trial ever done in Washington. And it's on those 2. The first trial was about Joe McEnroe, and that was a death penalty trial. I did the trial of her, Michelle, and but they didn't put on the table, they did not put the death penalty. The jurors had to decide if she's going to stay in prison, is it going to be forever, or can she come back in 25 years?
Wow.
And that became that book. And it's called Banquet of Consequences. What I'm proud of is after I had the stroke, I got 13 awards from that book and the next book that I wrote a week before my stroke. That's God being in a way. And I'm proud of that. And the family of the Andersons are part of my heart now.
Wow. And that's that, to be able to connect with the families and the survivors is so important. I think it's really interesting that the cases you've been involved with and followed all feature female killers too.
That is kind of crazy.
Yes, that's not generally as common a thing.
Not
the murder
world. And people ask, they say, oh, you are single? Why aren't you dating right now? Well, I know 3 reasons not to date a girl right now.
Right. So, I mean, how has your experience as an author and doing all this research and the patience with trials, how has that helped with your stroke recovery?
Oh, well, I'll tell you this. The first 8 months, I thought it didn't help me because I kept looking back at my stroke and saying, if my life had been different, I would still be writing books now. I was very angry. I was sad. I was crying. I was staying by myself. I kept remembering what the doctors, when they said, you have to know this right now, you may never write again. And there was a night that's when I learned, look forward, not backwards. So for me, the big thing about being a stroke is you have to realize that your whole life is now going to be different. And maybe you think you want to look back and say, darn it, what can I do? And once you realize in your head that you have to accept your fate in a way, it's like what we said in the beginning. You have to be positive. Even though it drives you crazy, you have got to be positive. So for me now, even though I'm not writing, let me tell you, I tell everybody about my books wherever I go. Hi, my name's Paul. I'm a writer. I wrote some books. If you want, and from that, I can start from something.
Right. And you know what, I think from a practical perspective, one of the things you showed off at one of our meetings was you had this incredible organizational structure for keeping track of appointments and forms and all of this stuff that you get when you leave the hospital. Because being a stroke survivor and living with disabilities, it involves just an amazing amount of paperwork and red tape.
Well, it's, and thank you for recognizing that. I look at it this way. It's kind of when you leave from the hospital, it's like a big box. And it's a box of jigsaw puzzles, okay? You can take that box and move it around and you can feel the pieces. And then you have to open the box and somehow put each piece together. I'm organized because you have to start from something. But it's like a box of a whole bunch of pieces and you have to, but each piece has another piece and you put it one piece together. And by the end, even though for us, we had everything slow, everything small steps, right? But it's like that jigsaw puzzle. Once you push the piece together, eventually you see a different picture of what those pieces are.
And one of the things that I think is really interesting, too, is that often we try and put things together, but we don't think, first of all, about the structure or putting together an organizational system in place. But even with that puzzle, what's the first thing that you do? You look for the corner pieces. You look for the edge pieces.
Yes.
And you start by putting together that structure, because once you have that basic rudimentary structure, then you can start filling in the rest of the picture.
Yes, and it's easier said than done. And you know,
oh, sure,
all of us who've been through a stroke, different sides. Some people have worse than me. I can never forget that even though at that time, having the stroke is the worst thing ever, you can never forget that somebody else got it worse than you. And so what you try to do as a stroke survivor who's positive is don't think about yourself. Think about the people around you. Think of the other stroke survivors. How can you help each other? Because it's just helping them, it helps you.
From a lot of perspectives, one of the biggest problems people have after stroke is depression and being isolated.
Yes.
And those two then feed on one another. Plus, there's just this broader sense that as people, we want to have significance. We want to have some sort of meaning. And after a stroke, if you're all cut off, it's really hard to see that and to do that. But if you can go out and help somebody else, you can do that.
It's not easy.
No.
I took the bus to go see a guy who doing a show. His name was Kirk Nurmi. And I knew him from the trial in Arizona. Not my trial, but the Jody Arias trial. And he was the lawyer. A year before I had the stroke, I found out that Kirk Nurmi had cancer. And I called him. Well, then in the middle, I have the stroke. And now it's a year later after I found about the cancer, and he said, go to my show. And at the end, we hugged. It was because he's not a lawyer anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm also, at that time, I was not a writer either. But we had something with the stroke and the cancer. There was something that made us connect.
Right.
Well, when I was leaving the show, I was going to find a bus, and I didn't want to tell him, will you give me a drive back to my home or anything like that. But when I left the show, I was so in my head, I was thinking about everything he said. So I'm walking for an hour, and I realized I was lost. I missed the wrong turn. And suddenly, because my head, and you forget when you're a stroke survivor, is those little things become very big. And I'm in the middle of nowhere. So I take my phone to find Google, right?
Pull up the Google Maps.
Yes, to find out how do I get back to a bus. And I follow the
dots and lines.
Yes. So I'm following, and it brings me into a lawn. And there's no lights anywhere. Huh. And I'm walking, and I'm looking at my phone. Well, then I turn my phone because I need lights to see where I'm walking.
Sure.
So I'm walking, and then my phone dies. I swear to God, Bill, nobody's around. It's dark. And I called to God, and I said, how can you do this to me? How can I get lost? And I was very angry. And then I'm like, okay, focus, and find a light and find a street. So then I'm walking across a lawn, and I realize something keep hitting me. And so I reach down with my hands, and what are these things I'm feeling? And I realize, oh my God, I'm in a cemetery.
Oh.
Holy cow. What is this? And in a way, I look at God and I'm like, I know you're funny, but this is not really that funny.
I think I read this Stephen King story when I was a teenager.
Yes, like that. And eventually, I do find the lights, and out of the blue, there's the bus. Just like that. All this thing in your heart, like, you're screaming, and then poof. And I get home, and now I'm calm, and I'm thinking, and I'm like, why did I go through that experience? I know why, Bill. Now because that night changed my life from being a stroke survivor is this. I realized behind me was a cemetery. And it's kind of like my old life. It's in a cemetery. There's nothing you can do about your old life anymore. Leave it there. So if you have to look back at your life, it's gonna be like the cemetery. And the only way you can get better is look forward, not backwards. And was probably the biggest thing I learned from being a stroke survivor.
Wow. And to look for that light that's ultimately going to get you out.
Yes.
So, with all of this, I mean, how have your fans of your writing? How's that community responded to the news of your stroke?
Oh my gosh. It was hard for everybody because the love that I got from around the world is really, really, really amazing to me. Maybe that's God, maybe it's our hearts, maybe it's they believe in me. And it's because of them, in a way, that makes me tell me to keep going. They're there. They'll wait for me. And that to me is the love that I felt to this day. I am grateful for them.
That is fantastic. And by having those folks who follow your story, they're going to have just a little bit more awareness of stroke and perhaps be able to avoid or treat their own should they have one someday.
Yes.
So what advice would you have for other writers who suddenly find themselves in stroke worlds and having to deal with a stroke?
It's a new day now. It starts with little steps. And for me, yes, I cannot write books now, but every day in the morning and night, I try to write some words to say positive, to don't stay by yourself. You have to start somewhere. And I just try to be positive, to learn what a stroke means. I have to learn things like what is aphasia, what's apraxia, what is that thing, short-term memory. To me, those are things that they're obstacles, okay? And our job for ourselves is to get over those things, to take those things for me after the stroke that these came from the stroke is, okay, it's my new cane in a way. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's not my favorite to have a cane in a way, but you know what? It is what it is. Now, how do you learn? How do you start by waking up in the morning, and instead of thinking, oh my God, my life sucks, now wake up in the morning and I write in the morning to my Facebook post and put out something that says, have a beautiful day. God bless. Nothing but love. Good morning, friends. And let me tell you, just because of that, to my heart, I feel better. That heart, the other people who read just those words, they feel better. As opposed to wake up in the morning and say, oh, my life sucks. Well, of course, if you're going to say that every day, it's going to suck.
Right. Right. And I suppose one of the things, too, is that, as a writer, you're always looking to expand your vocabulary, and you've managed to pick up words like aphasia and dysarthria and apraxia.
But that's something I have to learn. Like, to learn those words, it took me at least a year to learn those 3 words, or those things that come from the strokes. And I'm proud that now, because of I go to UW. I also go to the hospital. Part of
and UW, by the way, is the University of Washington.
Yes. And I go there to learn my words again. And let me tell you, I am grateful for what they are doing for me. And just for them to learn these words, to learn aphasia, to learn apraxia, to learn short-term memory. It's not something, and what you've been through too, is you have to work at your therapy. You have to, even though they will tell you the things to do, again, you have to be positive, not negative. But remember, it takes work, a lot of work, and I'm grateful for all the people who have helped me to get this far.
Absolutely. It's like these fingers aren't going to start moving again on their own.
Yes. Yes.
So, of course, as we've said, we've met through the Seattle Young Adult Stroke Survivors Group.
Yes.
What is the value you get out of attending that group and, knowing where it is? Can't be an easy commute for you to get to that group each month.
Well, now I'm a professional bus rider now. So for me, it used to be a year ago was very hard. I was worrying about lost and, oh my God, am I going to find it? Now to me is easy to get there, and I'm grateful for that. But the big thing to be around other stroke survivors, it's good for yourself, but it's good for the other people who have been stroke survivors. We learn from each other. That ride going there, I look forward to going to the young adult stroke survivors. And first, I will tell you, when you're a new stroke survivor, you don't want to be part of things like this because it's a new thing to you, but you're
still in denial about the whole thing.
Yes, but because I have of Kara at the Pacific, I can't say the hospital.
Oh, okay.
PNW.
Pacific Northwest.
Yes. It's because of Kara that she said, what you need to do is you have to go out and meet other people who have just went through strokes like you. And remember, you will learn from them as they will learn from you. And even though you may not want to do this, do it. It's good for yourself.
Absolutely. I think one of the things, too, is that sometimes people look at that and go, I'm not going to learn anything from going to a group. And, well, you're wrong. You will. But you don't have to think about it as what you're going to get out of it. Think of it as an opportunity for you to give back. And other people can learn from you.
Yes. And the best thing on yourself, in your heart, is when you help other people. And remember, I look back at this thing that happened to me, and it was very negative to me. But to know at the end to go to therapy with other people who had stroke survivors is the feeling that you feel from your heart when you help somebody else, and to maybe smile a little bit, maybe laugh a little bit, maybe laugh at yourself. You have to, and you know I've been there with you. And the one thing I like about you, Bill, is you've been there. But the good thing is you're very, you're happy. I forgot the word. That's okay. That's welcome aphasia. You forget the word. But what the thing is you're very positive. In spite of these things that happen to us, you help other people. And I am honored to be knowing with you, to be here with you, because I learn from you too.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. So, and you've been doing a fantastic job too. And I mean, we've been talking for almost an hour here.
It's crazy,
I
isn't
know,
it?
it's kind of amazing. So, if folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
The easiest way is on Facebook. That's where all my fans and friends and followers are.
There you go. And we'll also have that link over at strokecast.com/Paul. So that'll make it easier to find that as well. Awesome. So, Paul, this has been absolutely fantastic. I really like how this conversation went. So,
Me too.
awesome. Thank you for being on the show.
My honored.
And that brings us to our hack of the week.
A couple of things. I always, with me, every day, I bring a Sharpie, and I keep a pen, and I keep a notepad. And it's just a little thing that goes on your back pocket. But let me tell you, this has saved me 1,000,000 times. And sometimes when the words don't come out, sometimes you have to write the words. And let me tell you, bring that with you, because when after you have the stroke and you have aphasia and apraxia and all of that, there are the times when you are anxious, yes, and maybe you're lost, and suddenly those are the times that your words, that you need those words, they're not going to be there because
What happens is as your stress gets up and your anxiety gets stressed up, your brain after stroke does not multitask as well, and it doesn't have the resource. It has to pull resources away from language to focus on the stress, which doesn't help you get out of the situation.
And it doesn't at all. So have a notepad, and you can use it if you get lost. You can use it when sometimes you don't have the words, and you can write that one word. Because remember, and you know this, and I know this now, and for those who are a new stroke survivor, and people never say this, but just because you have that stroke and the problems that come with it, in your head, everything's normal.
That's right.
Okay? It's getting it out. So this thing will save you so many times. And so,
absolutely.
This, and this.
The Sharpie, the pen, and the notepad.
Paul's positive energy is great. He's a regular contributor at the Young Adult Stroke Survivors meetings, and if you're interested in true crime, you should definitely check out his books. Several times you probably heard me give Paul a word or finish his sentences. Generally, that's because he looked across the table at me and gestured for the word. We'd actually talked about that before recording. So, what is the proper etiquette for finishing the sentences of somebody with aphasia, or giving them the word that they're hunting for? I'd say it's really quite simple. Ask them. Communicate. You want to respect the wishes of the person you're talking with. A lot of folks may want to put in the effort to come up with those words that they're looking for. Others may simply want the message done as quickly as possible and ask you to support that and ask you to give them the words. Others may simply view the word finding as part of their therapy and an exercise they need to do. And you know what? That preference may change not only over time, but over the course of a day. As we get more tired, our stroke symptoms are likely to become more severe and our deficits become more pronounced. So somebody may want to struggle with their words early in the day, but towards the end of the day, they may really just not be up for the struggle. So the key there is communication. It's not really all that different from other disabilities in that respect. Generally, one of the best things you can do if you encounter somebody with a disability who looks like they might need assistance, offer assistance. But here's the key. When they say no thank you, respect that. When somebody says they don't need help, trust them. They know what they're talking about. I encountered something like this pretty vividly on the Joko cruise, and I talked about this a few months ago. I was in the British Virgin Islands, and I fell in a parking lot because a pillar that I leaned against for support turned out to not be attached to anything. And what happened is instantly, a couple of these folks who were working at the parking lot came over to help me, and they're reaching out to grab my arms and to pull me up. And I'm just like, no, I'm okay. I've got it. Let me take care of this. Because they're trying to help, but they're making it worse because they don't know what my disabilities are. They don't know what I can do. They don't know what I can't do. And grabbing my left arm, my spastic, Tony, and of limited use left arm is not going to be helpful and can potentially hurt even more. So what they really needed to do was just ask if they could help. And when I said no, trust me. It's that simple. I don't need help getting out of cars these days, although people will still sometimes run over to help me get out of an Uber or something like that. And, I appreciate the offers of assistance, but I appreciate more when folks respect that I've got this, that I can do it. And I think that approach applies to communication challenges as well. Be willing to offer assistance, and if somebody declines the assistance, respect that. If they do want the assistance, respect that as well and help them out as best you can. The other thing that I work through whenever I am talking with a guest who has aphasia is the editing process. Because as you listen to this episode, and as you've listened to other episodes where I've talked with folks with aphasia, I often cut out the long pauses, lots of the hemming and hawing and some of the repetition and some of the other manifestations of the aphasia. And I sometimes struggle with this. Am I sort of undermining somebody's communication or somebody's personal style? Is it sort of blinding the world to their condition? And is that fair? Well, I've kind of thought about it this way. First of all, I generally tell people ahead of time, I do edit this show. And when it comes to with folks who may have specific challenges, I'll go ahead and ask, if they feel strongly one way or the other. But ultimately, I added out pauses and ums and ahs and hemming and hawing on all of my guests, regardless of whether they are living with aphasia. I do that on this show. I do it on the 2-Minute Talk Tips podcast, the other podcast I run, which features experienced public speakers. And we all have those verbal tics. We all have those struggles from time to time. And of course, yes, it is fundamentally different. But when all is said and done, I want to create as strong an experience as possible for my audience, for you. I want to make sure that you are getting a good experience from listening to the show. And ultimately, everything is in support of you and what you're doing and how you're listening. It's not about me. It's not about my guest. It's about you being able to listen, connect, learn, understand, and really enjoy and get value out of each of the guests I bring and each of the episodes that I produce. So that's how I work through that. The key, again, make sure you're talking to folks. Make sure you are sharing the appropriate expertise and setting the appropriate expectations. So check out Paul's books on Amazon. You can find the links to those over at strokecast.com/Paul. Revisit previous author interviews over at strokecast.com/authors. And of course, follow me on Instagram at strokecast.com/Instagram. And, of course, as always, don't get best, get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you next week.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.